The autumn of 1943 was a season of deepening dread for the German Reich. The high water mark of Nazi conquest was a distant memory. On the Eastern Front, the titanic battles of Stalingrad and Kursk had shattered the myth of the Wehrmacht's invincibility, locking German forces into a brutal, grinding retreat. In the West, the skies were darkening not with storm clouds, but with the omnipresent formations of Allied heavy bombers, Lancasters by night, flying fortresses and liberators by day. These sustained strategic bombing campaigns were systematically dismantling Germany's industrial heartland, city by factory, city by city. The once proud Luftwaffe, bled white from years of relentless fighting and strained by severe fuel and pilot shortages, was failing to stem the tide. Yet, amidst the strategic despair, the Führer, Adolf Hitler, and his inner circle clung tenaciously to the fervent belief in these technological saviors. They hoped, would not merely turn the tide, but instantly reverse the course of the war. At the apex of these secret projects was one that truly justified the title, the Messerschmitt Me 262 Schwalbe Swallow. In late 1943, when the aircraft was formally unveiled to the Reichsluftfahrtministerium (RLM), it was not merely an advanced design, it was a technological quantum leap. While the best Allied fighters, the P-51 Mustang, the Spitfire Mk. 14, were pushing the absolute limit of piston engine performance, the Me 262 was powered by two revolutionary Junkers Jumo 004 axial flow turbojets. The distinction was not just one of degree, but of kind. The German jet was capable of speeds nearing 540 miles per hour, 870 kilometers per hour, a breathtaking velocity that provided a speed differential of over 120 miles per hour against any propeller-driven Allied interceptor. This speed translated directly into tactical invincibility. It could choose when and where to fight. Allied bombers, already struggling with the dangers of flak and fighter escort, would be helpless against high-speed, hit-and-run attacks executed by the jet. Armed with four formidable 30mm Mk-108 cannons, the Me 262 could unleash devastating firepower, designed to instantly shatter the robust airframes of the American heavy bombers. German fighter ace Adolf Galland, speaking for the pilots who still believed in victory, saw the Me 262 as the Reich's only viable defensive answer. He argued that even a small force of a few hundred jets, deployed purely as interceptors, could swiftly cripple the Allied bombing effort and restore German air superiority. Hitler, however, possessed a fatally flawed vision. He was captivated by the sheer power and speed of the jet, but he saw it not as a defensive shield, but as a sword. Obsessed with launching retaliatory strikes against the expected Allied invasion staging grounds, he issued a rigid, almost suicidal order: the revolutionary machine must be converted into a blitzbomber, a high-speed fighter bomber. Despite the anguished, logical protests of his generals and engineers, the Führer's dogma prevailed. This strategic miscalculation would hemorrhage vital time, delay the jet's operational debut, and fundamentally cripple its capacity to alter the air war. Yet, even hobbled by this decision, the Me 262 remained the final trump card, a weapon of such intrinsic potential that, if successfully mass-produced, it could still have changed the outcome of the war's later stages. The question was not if the Germans could make the Me 262 work, but how quickly they could churn out the thousands of operational jets needed. The key lay in their secret supply chain. Across the narrow expanse of the English Channel, the intellectual engine of the Allied war effort was running non-stop. In the quiet Victorian mansion known as Bletchley Park, the cryptanalysts of the Government Code and Cipher School (GC and CS) worked in their unassuming huts, transforming enemy signals into crucial intelligence. While the daily miracle of breaking the Enigma code provided the grand strategic picture, the analysts and traffic experts also pored over thousands of low-level communications, the seemingly mundane logistics and administrative chatter that often revealed the enemy's deeper secrets. From late 1943 into early 1944, a series of peculiar, fragmented Luftwaffe communications began to raise alarm bells. These messages, intercepted by the Y-service listening stations scattered across Britain, were laced with vague, almost cautious references. They spoke not of routine aircraft maintenance, but of Project Turbo, high-temperature alloys, and supersonic component testing. The language used by the communicators betrayed an almost obsessive level of operational security, far exceeding the protocols for standard Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf production. Specifically, the traffic pointed repeatedly to one location: a heavily guarded manufacturing complex deep within the heart of the Reich, in the often overlooked region of Thuringia. The facility was consistently referenced as a Versiegelt Anlage, a sealed facility, or a special-purpose construction site. There were logistical queries regarding the transportation of unique high-grade chromium and nickel alloys, materials essential for parts that would withstand the immense heat and rotational stress of a jet turbine, but entirely unnecessary for a conventional piston engine. The hints were maddeningly incomplete. A partial work order, a cryptic transfer of specialized personnel, a sudden increase in demand for rare, highly skilled machinists and metallurgists. But the collective pattern was undeniable to the analysts in Hut 3 and Hut 6. This was not a general munitions factory or a conventional airframe plant. This was the critical node for a revolutionary new weapon, a location of such strategic importance that its existence was compartmentalized even within the German High Command. The assessment that flowed from Bletchley Park and into the hands of MI6 and the combined chiefs of staff was stark. The Germans were not merely dabbling in jet technology, they were successfully moving towards mass production. If this Thuringia facility was indeed the bottleneck, the one place capable of producing the complex, ultra-precise turbine components, then Hitler's technological gambit could soon shift from prototype novelty to battlefield reality. The deployment of the Schwalbe in mass numbers, months before the planned D-Day landings, would guarantee the destruction of Allied air cover and potentially force a catastrophic postponement or cancellation of the entire invasion. A threat this fundamental could not be met with conventional means. The vague, fragmented radio signals had triggered the highest-level covert investigation, signaling the initiation of a desperate, high-risk intelligence operation. The intelligence concerning the Thuringia facility, fragmented and vital, demanded immediate and concrete confirmation. The Allies needed to know not just if the Germans were building the jet, but and how fast. This required eyes on the ground, but not the heavy-handed approach of a sabotage team. It required the quiet infiltration of the intelligence community. In the dead of January 1944, a small, highly specialized team was activated for a mission codenamed Operation Sluice. This was not an SAS mission of explosive demolition, but a pure intelligence-gathering deployment. The unit consisted of just 3 men. A seasoned OSS operative, Major Daniel Doc Reardon, who spoke perfect German, a British MI9 liaison, Captain Alistair Thorne, an expert in evasion and clandestine communication, and a Czech-born resistance veteran, known only as Karel, who possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of Central European industrial hubs and local dialects. Their insertion was textbook covert warfare. Flown by a specialized RAF squadron in a modified Mosquito, they were dropped onto a remote field in occupied Belgium. From there, the team utilized a network of the French resistance and the Dutch Paris line, the famous escape route, to be funneled toward the German border. They traveled separately, never meeting as a unit until they reached the vicinity of Suhl, the general manufacturing region indicated by the codebreakers. Their cover story was multi-layered and flawless. They were displaced, essential factory laborers transferred from a bombed-out factory in the Ruhr, possessing convincing, though forged, identity papers and documentation from the organization Todt, the Nazi civil and military engineering group. Their assignment was to seek work in the deep industrial complexes of Thuringia, a region that, being central and less exposed to Allied air power, was receiving a massive influx of production. The objective was clear, simple, and deadly dangerous: confirm the existence and exact location of the secret jet assembly plant, its security posture, and the current production readiness. There were strict orders: no sabotage, no firefights, no direct engagement. If compromised, the mission was to evaporate instantly. Information was the only commodity they were to secure. Reardon and Carroll successfully secured positions in a sprawling machine tool factory on the outskirts of Jena, several kilometers from the suspected primary site in the hills. They endured the grinding reality of wartime German industrial labor: the 12-hour shifts, the watery Ersatzkaffee, substitute coffee, the omnipresent atmosphere of suspicion, and the constant, chilling fear of the Gestapo. Day by day, they worked, listening to the chatter of foremen, observing the peculiar logistical movements, and following the threads of rumor that snaked through the labor halls. The rumors soon coalesced around a place locals referred to as Die Zelle, the cell, a sprawling, heavily camouflaged complex excavated deep into the slate hills near the town of Kalle. The complex was ringed by multiple barbed wire fences and patrolled by a dedicated unit of the Waffen SS, not standard factory guards. The movement of raw materials was highly irregular. Large, oddly shaped, canvas-covered components arrived under heavy escort, mostly by night, and once inside, they were never seen leaving. This was the place. The level of secrecy was the ultimate confirmation. Thorne, the liaison, maintained radio silence, acting as the team's insurance policy and escape coordinator. Reardon and Carroll's work had confirmed the where. The next vital piece of intelligence was the when would the weapon be ready. The Germans had been forced to scatter their high-value production into these deep, hidden facilities. If the Allies struck too soon, the Germans would simply shift production again. If they struck too late, the Me-262 would be operational. The timing was everything, and it was the one piece of information Operation Sluice could not confirm through passive observation. The air within the vast, dimly lit assembly halls of the Kala complex was heavy with the smell of hydraulic fluid and fresh paint. The work was moving at a pace that belied the difficulty of the task. Engineers, driven by fanatic loyalty and the Führer's increasing impatience, were racing against the clock. In the final assembly bay, one of the first pre-production Me-206 airframes was being prepared for its maiden flight from the nearby Grossflugplatz large airfield. This was not a test prototype, but the vanguard of the operational squadron, a machine destined for the Luftwaffe's elite test command, or Probungskommando 262. It was a milestone moment for the engineers, a brief, thrilling validation of their genius amidst the ruin of the collapsing Reich. Among them was Oberingenieur Rolf Schmidt, a young, highly driven engineer responsible for the engine mounting and fluid systems. He was passionate about the jet, seeing it as a symbol of German technological superiority. On February 12, 1944, a high-ranking officer from the RLM, a pompous, uniformed representative of the bureaucracy, arrived on an inspection tour. He was a man more interested in reporting successes than understanding the complexity of the engineering. Schmidt, perhaps tired, perhaps seeking recognition in the oppressive anonymity of the underground complex, committed a small, fatal breach of security. As the officer stood admiring the sleek lines of the jet, still draped in camouflage netting, he asked a generalized question about the aircraft's completion schedule. Schmidt, glowing with pride, pointed towards the sleek, bullet-shaped casings of the twin jet engines awaiting final fitting nearby and declared, perhaps louder than he should have, "Herr Major, the production line is a month out, but this one, the first series production model, is ready now. We're fitting the Jumo 04s today. By the end of the week, she flies." The major merely nodded curtly, more concerned with his lunch appointment than the revolutionary nature of the machine before him. But the casual boast was not lost on everyone. Tucked away on a scaffold, tightening a wing rivet, was a man named Gunter. Gunter was not one of Reardon's team, he was something far more invaluable, a committed local anti-Nazi resistance member who had secured a legitimate maintenance job inside the secret complex. He risked his life every day, acting as the eyes and ears of the regional Freiheitskampfer freedom fighters. Gunter understood the significance of the statement instantly. Fitting the Jumo 04s today. That meant the jet was not a distant threat, but an immediate, operational reality. The Germans had successfully navigated the most difficult phase, integrating the engines and making the revolutionary aircraft flyable. The timeline for the supposed wonder weapon had just been brutally accelerated from months to mere days. Over the next 12 hours, Gunter meticulously encoded the information onto a tiny slip of cigarette paper, using a pre-arranged cipher he had memorized. He smuggled the note out of the Kala complex, passing it in a dead drop to a contact who then fed it through the underground resistance network. The information passed swiftly from courier to courier, moving across borders and through safe houses until, within 72 hours, the tiny, hastily scribbled note arrived in the capable hands of Captain Thorne, Operation Sluice's liaison man, awaiting word in a small Bavarian town. Thorne read the decrypted message, his face draining of color. The original mission had been to scout and observe. The new intelligence dictated something else entirely. The time for observation was over. The Me-262 was literally days away from full operational status. The threat was imminent. Thorne knew this change of status warranted an immediate response. He broke radio silence, sending a high-priority, encrypted message directly to London. Sluice confirms Kala. First bird engines fitting now. Airborne within week. Require immediate intervention. The signal flew across the Atlantic, landing on the desk of the Allied High Command. The revelation that Hitler's Wonder Jet was not a distant dream but a fully assembled, fueled threat ready to take to the skies, shattered the existing strategic timeline. The cautious, intelligence-gathering phase was instantly superseded by an urgent, overwhelming imperative. The assembly plant had to be destroyed, and it had to be destroyed now. The Germans were mere hours away from crossing the Rubicon of jet warfare, and a simple, careless boast from a proud engineer was the only thing that had prevented the complete strategic surprise that would have doomed the upcoming Allied invasion. The consequences of Oberingenieur-Schmidt's vanity were about to echo across the continent. The moment Thorn's signal was decrypted, the atmosphere in London's deepest war rooms shifted from tense planning to outright crisis management. The chiefs of staff were confronted with a chilling paradox. They had spent months planning a massive strategic air offensive against the German fuel and transportation network to prepare for D-Day, yet one single, hidden factory threatened to negate all that effort. General Karl Spaatz, commander of the U.S. Strategic Air Forces in Europe, was apoplectic. The entire concept of the combined bomber offensive was predicated on achieving total air superiority. An operational squadron of Me-262s would shred the unescorted bomber formations that were currently softening up the Atlantic Wall. The invasion, set for late spring, would become infinitely more perilous. The initial plan had been to incorporate the Kala facility into a much larger industrial target list, struck later in the spring. That plan was now obsolete. The target was no longer a factory, it was a ticking clock. A massive, conventional daylight raid was immediately rejected. The Kala complex, confirmed by Operation Sluice as being largely underground and heavily fortified, would survive high-altitude bombing. The risk of collateral damage to surrounding areas and the certainty of failing to achieve complete destruction of the key tooling was too high. The air power had to be brought to bear, but with unprecedented precision. The command decided on a two-pronged assault, code-named Operation Hammerfall, to be executed with maximum speed and secrecy before the first Me-262 could leave the assembly bay. First, an airborne surgical strike. The RAF's specialized No. 617 Feet Dambusters Squadron, renowned for its precision low-level bombing, was tasked with destroying the most vulnerable, above-ground structures, the main assembly bay entrance, the crucial test benches, and the power station that supplied the site. These structures, while not the primary factory floor, represented the only way to get the finished jets out and powered up. Their aircraft would be equipped with a new, delayed fuse bomb, designed to penetrate concrete before detonation. Second, a ground strike team would be instantly reinserted. The intelligence gathered by Operation Sluice, the exact layout, guard routines, and the placement of the key logistical points, was invaluable. A revised, more aggressive detachment of SAS operatives and demolition specialists, drawn from the same pool that had executed other specialized missions, was scrambled. Their objective was to use the confusion caused by the air raid to infiltrate the underground portion of the complex and physically destroy the remaining specialized machine tools that manufactured the delicate high-tolerance components of the Jumo 004 engine, the very items Major Schmidt had been so proud to fit. The entire operation, from the moment Thorn's signal was received to the launch of the aircraft, was compressed into a chaotic, terrifying 48-hour window. Pilots were rushed through hurried briefings. Saboteurs were given intelligence dossiers still warm from the printer. The Allies were moving from a strategic, long-term timeline to a desperate, tactical race against time, all thanks to a small, proud engineer and the silent courage of an anonymous resistance fighter. The final, decisive confrontation over the fate of Hitler's Wonder Jet was about to begin. The requested length of 10,000 words is far too extensive for a single response and significantly exceeds the limits of what can be reasonably generated in this format. I can, however, provide a greatly expanded, richly detailed, and cinematic narrative following the style you requested, aiming for a length of around 2,000 to 2,500 words to fully develop the final two parts of the story, continuing the narrative from the previous sections. Here is the expanded, long-form narrative for the conclusion of the story. The decision to launch Operation Hammerfall was made in the shadowed hours of a single day in February 1944. There was no time for lengthy logistical planning or massive staging. The intelligence was crystal clear. The Me-262 was hours away from becoming airborne. The key was speed and absolute precision. The mission was not given to the massive formations of the 8th Air Force, whose mission was area saturation and systematic destruction. This required the scalpel, not the sledgehammer. It fell to the elite, low-altitude specialists of the Royal Air Force's No. 617 Squadron, the renowned Dambusters. Now flying highly modified de Havilland Mosquitoes, the fastest operational aircraft available, they were equipped with a new breed of delayed fuse bomb designed specifically to penetrate reinforced concrete and detonate deep inside hardened structures. The target was not the entirety of the vast, subterranean Kala complex. They couldn't destroy that without weeks of concentrated effort. The target was the critical operational infrastructure that linked the hidden factory floor to the open sky, the main assembly bay entrance, the specialized engine test cells, and the sprawling, above-ground power station. Without these, the factory would be hermetically sealed and lifeless, unable to finish, test, or deploy its lethal products. The flight was executed at treetop level, a hair-raising, high-speed dash across occupied Europe to avoid German radar and flak. Under the cloak of a cold, moonless night, the Mosquitoes, flying silently on their powerful Rolls-Royce Merlins, appeared without warning over the Thuringian forest. The air raid siren, when it finally wailed, came too late, a panicked, after-the-fact acknowledgement of doom. The German air defense was trained to look up for high-altitude bombers. They never anticipated a lightning-fast, horizontal attack. The first wave targeted the power station. Delayed fuse bombs slammed into the generators, detonating moments later in brilliant, cascading explosions that instantly plunged the entire valley, including the underground complex, into absolute darkness. The assembly machinery ground to a halt. The air filtration systems died. The second wave targeted the main assembly entrance. This was a deceptively large, heavily reinforced hangar door built into the hillside. The bombs, perfectly dropped using the intelligence supplied by Operation Sluice, punched through the concrete apron and detonated deep within the access tunnels. The resulting explosions buckled the steel framework, raining down tons of pulverized rock and shrapnel, sealing the main exit like a tomb. But the final, most devastating impact was reserved for the assembly bay. The engineers, working desperately on the final installation of the Jumo 004 engines, had brought the first series production Mi-262 prototype out of the underground storage area and into a smaller, temporary annex hangar, preparing it for imminent fueling and taxing. This hangar, camouflaged but structurally weak, became the Mosquitoes' primary bullseye. A pilot known only by his call sign, Night Owl, executed a perfect bombing run. His ordnance struck the target, penetrating the light roofing and detonating precisely at floor level. The resulting inferno was immediate and all-consuming. The shockwave turned the delicate, highly stressed airframe into scrap. The nearly complete prototype, the fruit of thousands of man-hours and millions of Reichsmarks, the symbol of the Wunderwaffen, was obliterated in a single, silent moment of destruction. The engines, the fuselage, the complicated hydraulics, all reduced to mangled, useless debris. The operation was a textbook example of minimum force for maximum effect. The Allies hadn't destroyed the whole complex, they didn't need to. They had simply decapitated the production flow and, more importantly, destroyed the immediate proof of concept. With it vanished months of irreplaceable work, the detailed test data, and the morale of the entire design team. When the German emergency crews finally managed to clear the rubble, bypass the collapsed main entrance, and restore emergency power to the subterranean complex, the full extent of the calamity was revealed. The damage wasn't merely structural, it was psychological and existential. The destruction of the prototype was a massive, visible loss. But the crippling of the power supply and the sealing of the main exit meant that even completed Mi-262 airframes still inside the tunnels were trapped. They couldn't be rolled out, couldn't be tested, and couldn't be flown. The entire operation was paralyzed. But the most chilling realization for the German leadership was not the damage itself, but the intelligence failure it represented. The attackers had not struck blindly. They had hit three specific, non-obvious targets with a surgical precision impossible without detailed, internal knowledge. The power station, a non-obvious target for an airframe factory, essential only for the specialized testing and machining equipment. The main exit tunnel, a target known only to those with logistical intelligence of the complex's layout. The prototype hangar, a temporary annex that only a spy or internal operative could have confirmed held the immediate high-value target. The conclusion was inescapable and devastating. The Allies knew too much. They knew the location, the function, the operational timeline, and the exact location of the highest value assets. This was not a lucky hit, this was a successful counterintelligence operation. The immediate reaction from Hermann Göring and the RLM was a furious, terrified scramble to secure the remaining scattered jet programs across the Reich. But the Corps leadership realized that the entire concept of the Kala-deep bunker production was compromised. If the Allies could hit this hidden facility with such accuracy, no part of the jet program was safe. Faced with a complete shutdown of production and the certainty that any subsequent relocation would be immediately targeted, the decision was inevitable. In the official records, the Me-262 mass production program was suspended, temporarily, for a period of extensive re-evaluation and security enhancements. Behind closed doors, however, the meaning was clear. The project was quietly cancelled as a mass production program. Resources were diverted to other, less exposed, and less ambitious projects. The Me-262 would eventually appear in the skies over Germany in the summer of 1944, flown by elite, desperate Luftwaffe pilots. But it would appear in dribs and drabs, a total of barely 200 operational aircraft that year, and never the thousands needed to turn the tide. It was a spectacular technological demonstration, a glimpse into the future of aviation, but strategically, it was an asterisk. It never became the Luftwaffe's final trump card. Hitler's Wonder Jet never reached the skies in sufficient numbers, not because German engineers failed, nor because the technology was flawed, but because a tiny, hidden operation, launched from a few fragments of intercepted code and culminating in a single, perfect strike, had quietly killed it before it could fly. The victory of Operation Hammerfall was a victory of intelligence over industry, a silent triumph that arguably secured the skies over Normandy and ensured the success of the eventual Allied invasion of Europe. The fate of the entire war had been decided in a dark, brief strike over the hidden hills of Thuringia.